Good day, everyone! It's English time. For our third week, let us talk about primary and secondary sources. Here are our learning objectives. At the end of the lesson, you will be able to expand the content of an outline using notes from primary and secondary sources, and use writing conventions to indicate acknowledgement of sources. During your grade 7, primary, secondary, and tertiary sources were discussed. Can you still remember them? If your answer is yes, you may continue watching this video lesson and answer your first task. If not, kindly click the link on the description box below and watch English 7, Module 2, Week 4, Researching a Topic. It may help you in answering the task. For your first task, let us see if you can still identify them. Read the following descriptions and determine if it is a primary or a secondary source. On your notebooks, kindly write Week 3 Learning Task 1. Just kindly answer A if it is a primary source and B if it is a secondary source. Answers only. You may pause the video or you may look on your module to answer Week 3 Learning Task 1. In writing an academic essay or research, you have to gather information and evidences from a variety of sources like books, news articles, interviews, website, etc. In this week's lesson, we will discuss the primary and secondary sources, what they are and when you can use them. Let us first talk about a primary source. A primary source is anything that gives you direct evidence about the people, events, or phenomena that you are researching. Primary sources will usually be the main objects of your analysis. If you are researching the past, you cannot directly access it yourself, so you need primary sources that were produced at the time by participants or witnesses. If you are researching something current, your primary sources can be collected by yourself or sources produced by people directly involved in the topic. Remember that when we say primary source, it talks about first-hand accounts, record or evidence about a person, place, object, or an event. The point of view is, I was there. It is more credible as an evidence. The examples of a primary source are videos, films, interviews, weather records, letters, diaries, and legal agreements. What about a secondary source? A secondary source is anything that describes, interprets, evaluates, or analyzes information from primary sources. Remember that when we say secondary source, it talks about accounts, record, or evidence that comes from an original or primary source. The point of view is, I heard or learned about it from somebody who was there, and show how your work relates to existing research. The examples of a secondary source are textbooks, documentaries, and journal articles. Now let us talk about which is better, primary or secondary sources. Most research uses both primary and secondary sources. They complement each other to help you build a convincing argument. Primary sources are more credible as evidence, but secondary sources show how your work relates to existing research. When are we going to use a primary source and when are we going to use a secondary source? We are going to use a primary source to make new discoveries, provide credible evidence for your arguments, and give authoritative information about your topic. On the other hand, we are going to use a secondary source to gain background information on the topic, support or contrast your arguments with other researchers' ideas, and gather information from primary sources that you can't access directly. For your second task, you are going to sort the sources and the characteristics in the appropriate circle. Any sources or characteristics that are both primary or secondary may be written in the center circle. We have here newspaper, interview, diary, textbook, speech, videotape, pictures, autobiography, biography, encyclopedia, original artwork, words written after an event has occurred, actual words of people who witnessed an event and provide evidence about the history. Sort the sources and the characteristics in the appropriate circle. To summarize this week's discussion, we talked about the difference between primary source and secondary source. Again, when we say primary source, it talks about first-hand accounts, record or evidence about a person, place, object, or an event. Its point of view is, I was there. On the other hand, when we say secondary source, it talks about accounts, record, or evidence that comes from an original or primary source. The point of view is, I heard or learned about it from somebody who was there. If you have questions, feel free to ask. That's all for today. Goodbye, class.